When an avoidant person chooses to stay, even when every instinct inside of them is screaming to run, that's not just commitment. It's love at its most vulnerable. You have to understand that for someone with an avoidant attachment style, closeness isn't neutral, it's terrifying. Connection can feel like a threat to their sense of autonomy, safety, and emotional control. These aren't people who grew up feeling safe in intimacy. Often they've learned consciously or unconsciously that needing someone, depending on someone, being open to someone leads to pain, rejection, or abandonment. So their emotional reflex is to pull back the moment things get too real. But if this person is choosing to stay, not just physically but emotionally, they're doing something radical, something that costs them. Staying doesn't mean they're always calm about it. It doesn't mean they express love in traditional or obvious ways. It might look like a struggle. It might feel like distance, hesitation, or silence. But behind that silence is an internal war they are fighting between fear and love, between protection and connection. And if they are still beside you through that, if they're holding the line in the middle of that internal chaos, it's because you mean enough to them that they are willing to sit with the discomfort. That's not easy for them. Avoidants are wired to escape tension, they self-soothe by detaching. But if they are resisting that instinct, if they are choosing to lean in rather than check out, that is not just effort, it is transformation in real time. You may not always see the love in their words. They may not say, "I love you," as often as you'd like, or open up in the way you're used to. But if they're showing up, if they're trying, if they haven't disappeared when you expected them to, that's their way of screaming, "I care." For the avoidant person, staying in a relationship, especially when conflict arises or when they feel exposed, is a battle against deeply rooted survival strategies. And they're choosing to fight that battle, not because it's easy, not because they've figured it all out, but because they don't want to lose you. Because your presence in their life is becoming more valuable than their old coping mechanisms. That is powerful. And yes, there will be moments when they pull back, when they need space, when they retreat into silence. When an avoidant initiates contact, it's not a casual or impulsive act. It's a deeply intentional gesture that often comes with internal resistance. These individuals are not wired to seek out closeness. In fact, they often associate emotional intimacy with losing control or being overwhelmed. So when they reach out to you, when they send that message, make that call, or simply check in without being prompted, understand that this isn't just routine communication. It's a break. Moment. It may seem small on the surface, but underneath, there's a massive shift taking place. They are stepping outside of their comfort zone and choosing to connect. This doesn't mean they'll always reach out frequently or consistently. That's not how they operate, especially in the beginning. But the important thing to recognize is asterisk. Why asterisk? They're reaching out. It's not to fill silence or ease boredom. It's not performative. It's because something inside them wants to bridge the gap despite the fear that often urges them to maintain distance. Avoidants typically find emotional outreach risky. When they initiate, they are risking rejection, misinterpretation, or feeling out of control. And yet, they still do it. Not because it's easy, but because you've become important enough that staying silent feels more painful than the risk of reaching out. Their outreach might not always follow the traditional romantic script. It might come in the form of a practical question, a dry meme, a random observation, or even a comment that seems distant on the surface. But don't mistake subtlety for indifference. What they're really saying is, "I'm thinking about you. I want you in my world, even if I don't know how to say it the way you might expect." For an avoidant, expressing emotion directly can feel too vulnerable, too exposed, so they test the waters gently, quietly. Each small step toward you is a victory over their internal resistance. Every message, every call, every "I was just wondering" is their version of a love letter. And sometimes the biggest sign of love is when they reach out after conflict or after pulling away. For them, space is a coping mechanism. Silence gives them control. But when they return, especially of their own will, it's not a sign of detachment, it's a sign of growth. They could have stayed away. They could have used distance as a wall. But instead, they're coming back, trying again, often awkwardly, often imperfectly, but sincerely. This return is not only a sign of affection, but a quiet admission that they miss you, that they value you, and that they're trying perhaps in the only way they know how. The key with avoidant communication is to listen not just to the words, but to the intention behind them. Avoidants aren't great with vulnerability, but they are deeply sensitive beneath the surface. So when they initiate contact, it means they're working against their own instincts of self-protection. They are stepping into the emotional arena, even if they're doing it carefully. They're trying to keep the connection alive, not because they need validation, but because they're beginning to recognize that closeness doesn't have to mean loss or danger. It can mean safety, belonging, and even joy. When they reach out, they're making a choice. They're choosing you over silence. They're choosing presence over absence. And most importantly, they're choosing growth over comfort. It may not always come with the ideal timing, and it may not always be expressed in poetic language, but if you pay attention, you'll see it. The quiet, powerful act of someone letting their guard down just enough to say, "I care." And for an avoidant, that isn't just affection. It's love, deep and real. That's part of the pattern, but what matters most is that they come back. They don't stay gone. They don't end things to avoid dealing with feelings. They return not out of obligation, but out of something deeper, something they probably don't even know how to name. Love, for the avoidant, doesn't come with fireworks and poetry. It comes with endurance, with showing up when every emotional nerve is saying run, with not choosing the easy way out, with being willing to be uncomfortable in order to stay close to someone who matters. So if you're with someone avoidant and you see them struggle but stay, see their discomfort but also their effort, know that you are witnessing an act of love that's raw and rare. You are witnessing someone challenge their own wiring to remain connected. That doesn't just mean they like you. It means they trust you. And for someone who's spent their life trying to avoid vulnerability, that's the highest form of intimacy they can offer. When an avoidant begins to show you their flaws, fears, or emotional wounds, you are witnessing something incredibly rare and significant. For someone with this attachment style, vulnerability is often associated with danger. Somewhere along the way, whether through childhood experiences, past relationships, or trauma, they learned that opening up emotionally could lead to pain, rejection, or abandonment. So they became masters of self-protection. They built emotional armor, crafted polished versions of themselves, and learned to navigate relationships while keeping their true selves hidden. It's not because they lack depth. It's because their depth has been repeatedly hurt or misunderstood. So when that person, who usually hides behind silence, logic, or detachment, starts to let you in even a little, it's a profound act of trust. It might not look like a dramatic emotional confession. It might be a quiet statement about something that makes them anxious. A passing comment about a past experience they rarely talk about. A subtle mention of something that triggers them or something they regret. And when that happens, understand what's really taking place. Their emotional walls are cracking, not because they've suddenly become fearless, but because love is slowly replacing fear. They are letting you see the parts of themselves that they typically keep locked away, the messiness, the uncertainty, the moments that make them feel small or unworthy, And they are not doing this for sympathy or validation. They're doing it because your presence feels safe enough to try. It's an unspoken way of saying, I trust you with the parts of me I've always had to hide. For someone who's used to surviving on emotional independence, this level of openness can feel like standing on the edge of a cliff. And yet they're choosing to take that step, not because they have to, but because they want to, because something about being with you makes them believe that maybe, just maybe, they won't fall. It's important to realize that this act of revealing their fears doesn't come easily or all at once. It comes in fragments, moments of hesitation followed by courage, and often it comes with a look of uncertainty, as if they're waiting for you to flinch, to judge, to retreat. But if you stay, if you hold that space without criticism or pressure, you give them something they've rarely experienced, emotional safety. That safety is everything to them. It's not just comforting, it's healing. As they begin to expose more of their inner world, they're not just sharing information, they're extending an invitation. They are saying, here's who I really am. Can you accept me even here? And if you do, if you meet that vulnerability with compassion instead of reaction, you'll see them soften. You'll see defenses slowly drop and intimacy slowly rise. Because for avoidance, love isn't proven in grand romantic gestures. It's proven in moments when they allow you to see their humanity, their imperfect, scared, real humanity. This process is rarely linear. Some days they may open up, other days they may retreat. That's not because they've stopped trusting you, but because vulnerability still feels unsafe to them. They're not used to emotional exposure, and their default response is often to pull back before it feels too raw. But every time they come back to that place of honesty, even in small ways, they're building a new emotional muscle. They're saying over and over again, I'm willing to try again. That's not weakness, that's courage. So if an avoidant shows you their fears, don't overlook the magnitude of what you're being given. You're not just seeing a side of them most people never do. You're becoming part of a transformation, one that turns distance into closeness and self-protection into connection. You are witnessing love not in words, but in truth. And truth, when shared this way, is one of the most powerful forms of love there is. When an avoidant starts to prioritize you, not with grand declarations, but through subtle, consistent actions, they are showing love in one of the most authentic ways they can. For people with avoidant tendencies, love isn't something they express easily through words or overt emotional displays. In fact, they may find typical romantic gestures uncomfortable or forced, but that doesn't mean they don't care deeply. It means they express love through reliability, attention to detail, and being quietly present. To them, love is demonstrated in what they do, not what they say. You might notice them remembering the smallest things about you. How you take your coffee, the way you like your space arranged, or which days are hardest for you. These are not accidental observations. They're paying attention even when they seem emotionally distant. That's because their minds are often scanning for ways to serve or show care without having to expose themselves emotionally. They'll fix things without being asked. They'll offer practical help when you're stressed. They'll show up when they know you're in need, even if they don't say much when they get there. These small, consistent behaviors are their version of I love you. It's not loud, but it's solid. The beauty of this kind of love is that it's rooted in presence. An avoidant might not always understand emotional needs in the traditional sense, but if they value you, they will begin to structure their behavior around what makes your life easier, more stable, and more comfortable. They might check in on you in subtle ways or anticipate what you need before you say it. Not because they feel obligated, but because you've become someone they want to invest energy in. For someone who often keeps their world tightly controlled and compartmentalized, Making space for another person in their routine is a deeply significant act. And when conflict arises, their way of showing they still care might not be through long emotional conversations. It might be through repairing something that broke, offering a thoughtful gesture, or continuing to support your needs even when they're feeling emotionally off-center. In their world, actions often come before words, because words feel risky and actions feel safe. So if they are showing up, following through, and consistently making you part of their life in these tangible ways, they are expressing something they may not yet be able to articulate out loud. This type of love can be easy to overlook if you're expecting passion or verbal affirmation. But look closer. Love, for an avoidant, often whispers. It doesn't chase or cling. It's not intense or dramatic. Instead, it's careful, deliberate, and deeply loyal once it forms. If they make time for you, adjust their schedule, or shift long-held habits for your sake, you're not just a casual presence in their life. You're someone they've chosen to prioritize despite the discomfort that closeness sometimes brings. These consistent actions might include remembering your important dates, offering support when you're going through challenges, or simply being physically present even if they're emotionally reserved. It could be taking on small responsibilities without being asked, showing up for your big moments, or quietly checking in after a tough day. None of this is accidental. It's a conscious investment. And for someone who values independence above almost everything else, choosing to make you part of their regular world is a powerful act of love. It's also important to recognize that these gestures are not easy for them. Prioritizing someone else means disrupting their sense of control, their routines, and their emotional defenses. It requires effort and risk. But if they're doing it anyway, if they're choosing inconvenience, vulnerability, or emotional discomfort in order to support or care for you, it's because they're in this with you, even if their words haven't caught up with their actions yet, so don't underestimate these quiet forms of prioritization. For the avoidant, they represent trust, care, and a deep emotional shift. They are saying, in the only way they know how, you matter to me. I want to be here for you, even if I'm still learning how. And in that consistent presence, you can find a kind of love that is slow, steady, and deeply sincere. When an avoidant begins to talk about the future and includes you in that vision, it's a powerful, telling moment that should not be taken lightly. For someone with an avoidant attachment style, the future often feels like pressure. It can represent loss of control, loss of space, and a perceived threat to their autonomy. Planning ahead in a relationship can trigger fears of being trapped, overwhelmed, or obligated. So when they start to talk about long-term goals, future trips, shared responsibilities, or even moving in together, they are doing something incredibly brave. They are pushing against the very instinct that usually keeps them distant, and they're moving toward you, not away. Avoidants often avoid future-oriented conversations because they force them to confront emotions and commitments that feel uncertain or risky. Their wiring tells them to stay in the present, to keep things casual and safe, to avoid putting themselves in a position where they could be hurt or abandoned down the line. So when they begin to say things like, maybe we could do this next year, or what if we tried living in another city together, or even something as simple as, what would our life look like in 5 years? These are not just idle musings. These are signs of emotional investment. They are letting you into their long-term thinking, and that means you're not just a momentary part of their life. You're someone they're starting to picture as permanent. This kind of future talk may not come in a dramatic or overly romantic package. It may feel understated or even awkward. They might bring up shared logistics before emotions. They might talk about practicalities, financial planning, career moves, or long-term goals before expressing how they feel emotionally about it. That's because this is how they feel safest entering into deeper emotional waters, by starting with structure, then easing into sentiment. But make no mistake, the fact that they are initiating any kind of conversation that includes you in their future is a strong sign of emotional progress. For them, it's not about dreaming, it's about making space for you in a life they used to only imagine managing alone. They may also begin to take your dreams and desires into account when making decisions. This could look like them asking what you want in the years ahead, or considering how their choices affect you. They may begin to compromise more or factor your presence into their personal timelines. All of this points to one thing: they are beginning to see their life as something shared. That's not something they do easily. It means they are beginning to shift their internal framework from me to we. And that shift takes courage, especially for someone who has spent so much of their life protecting themselves from the potential loss that comes with love. And yes, there may be moments when they hesitate, backtrack, or seem unsure. That doesn't mean they don't care. It means they are navigating a new emotional territory that feels foreign and uncertain. They are learning to stretch beyond what their defense mechanisms tell them is safe. But the fact that they return to these future-based conversations, even after moments of withdrawal, shows you that something in them is shifting. They are beginning to value the idea of a future with you more than the comfort of their solitude. What's even more significant is that future planning often represents hope. For avoidants who sometimes brace themselves for relationships to fail before they begin, speaking about the future with someone else is an act of optimism. It says, I believe in us, I believe this could work, I want to try. Even if they don't say those words aloud, the intention is there. They are allowing themselves to hope, and that hope is born from love. Not superficial love, not fleeting passion, but a deep, growing, intentional love that's starting to override their fear. So if you hear an avoidant begin to include you in their vision of the future, no matter how subtly, pay attention. That is not just a casual remark. It is a profound act of emotional vulnerability. It means they are not just surviving the relationship. They are beginning to trust in its longevity. They are imagining a life where you are not just a chapter, but a part of the whole story. And for someone who once saw independence as safety, that's one of the clearest signs of love they could ever give. When an avoidant starts to work on themselves, when they begin to actively examine their behaviors, reflect on their patterns, and even try to change the way they show up in a relationship, it's one of the most powerful and meaningful signs that they love you deeply. Avoidants don't typically see themselves as the ones who need to change. In fact, they often feel safest when they're emotionally self-sufficient and unbothered by emotional demands. They've likely built their entire sense of security around not needing others, not being too affected, and keeping their emotional lives private and controlled. So the idea of self-growth in the context of a relationship can feel threatening at first, because it means acknowledging that their way of coping might not be serving them or you. But when they begin to take steps toward change, even if they're small, what they are really doing is saying, you matter enough to challenge what I've always believed about love and connection. It might start with something as subtle as reading about attachment styles or reflecting on past conflicts. Maybe they begin asking questions about how to communicate better, or they attempt to open up more during conversations. Perhaps they begin therapy or start journaling about their emotions. These actions may not seem dramatic, but for an avoidant, they are enormous leaps forward. These are individuals who have spent most of their emotional lives avoiding introspection in the realm of relationships. So when they choose to look inward, they're not just growing, they're loving you in the process. What makes this act of self work so significant is that it requires them to confront the very things they've tried to keep buried. Fear of intimacy, fear of rejection, fear of losing themselves in closeness. They are not doing this to check a box or appear more attractive. They are doing it because being with you has awakened something inside them. They've realized that their old patterns, while protective, are also limiting, that they're missing out on something deeper and more fulfilling. And for them to come to that realization and then act on it is a tremendous shift. It's a declaration not always spoken, but deeply felt, that they are willing to change the shape of their inner world to make space for love. And this kind of change is rarely fast or linear. There will be steps forward and steps back. There will be moments when they revert to silence, defensiveness, or withdrawal. But if they keep coming back, if they keep trying, if they keep showing up with a little more awareness each time, that is progress. That is love. True change doesn't happen because someone nags them or pushes them. It happens because something inside them chooses to evolve. And if you are the catalyst for that internal shift, then you are witnessing one of the deepest forms of love an avoidant can express, the willingness to grow not just for themselves, but for the relationship you're building together. You may notice that they start apologizing more sincerely, or that they show a greater willingness to hear how their actions affect you. They may begin to ask, "How can I support you better?" or "What do you need from me right now?" These questions might be new to them. They might come with hesitation or a lack of finesse, but their presence marks the beginning of emotional maturity and relational awareness. It's not about perfection. It's about the willingness to move beyond emotional survival and toward emotional connection. And that willingness, for someone who has lived inside a shell of self-protection, is an act of incredible emotional bravery. When someone begins to rewrite their emotional playbook, especially someone who never thought they needed to, they are not just participating in the relationship. They are reshaping who they are because they believe in the potential of what you share. That is not easy. That is not casual. That is the kind of love that runs deep beneath the surface, anchored in action and driven by a desire to become someone who can love better, give more, and receive more freely. So if the avoidant in your life is working on themselves, even quietly, even imperfectly, recognize the profound message they're sending. I choose you, and I'm becoming the version of myself that can hold this love with both hands.